Still a better love story than Twilight. A phrase ubiquitous with 2010's internet culture. A meme that has been repeated into the grave so much that, like its namesake, it has become a member of The Walking Dead. At least dead enough to warrant an autopsy in the opening of a video essay about a shoddy 90s Mpreg horror flick. Twilight and the monster romance genre has been making a bit of a comeback over the past few years, with the resurgence of fae romance novels, the rise of ABO werewolf erotica in the mainstream, and just whatever the hell Chuck Tingle writes. Monster lovers are back and stronger than ever. But the craze kind of never left certain circles, and by certain circles, I do in fact, it never left anime. Anime such as The Ancient Magus's Bride, Monster Musume, Rosario X Vampire, Dungeon Meshi, Ryoko Kui, I Know What You Are, and many other monster girl-oriented fares all feature some sort of sexy, fish-out-of-water trope. Typically, this involves some sort of normalish person being swept up in this whole new world, where the extraordinary is real, they have their eyes open to how the world really works, and just, you know the drill. It's all basically the same. The normal person has these revelations because of some sort of inciting incident, which typically involves a run-in with a powerful, mysterious, and beautiful, beyond compare, supernatural force. This supernatural force, of course, just so happens to be a marketable humanoid anime girl or ikemen that desperately wants to jump the MC's bones, and maybe gnaw on them a little bit too. Many anime that center around monster girls in particular tend to follow this trend. Whether it's played straight or not largely depends on the anime's genre. This is barring the obvious romance genre most of them share, like duh. For instance, Call the Night is about a middle schooler named Ko falling in love with the vampire Nozuna to escape his boring Wait, isn't she like 30? Oh, I knew she was a monster, but that kind of monster... let's move on to the next one. Vampire Dormitory, meanwhile, is a gender bender about the homeless Mito Yamamoto, an androgynous girl who has a romance with the implied to be bisexual king, Ruka Sawatome. The latter of which just so happens to be a hopeless vampire that is afraid of women. Mito's life is changed because she becomes his thrall under unwitting circumstances for food and shelter. Yay for not being homeless anymore. You go, girl. Definitely can't backfire. And for our final example, the quintessential monster effer anime, Vampire Knight. I'm just kidding. Could you imagine if I talked about Vampire Knight during this? While it would be fitting, I think we would be here for hours upon hours talking about the Sweet Home Alabama twist of it all, which is foreshadowing, by the way, because we have our own twist like that. Anyway, I was talking about Monster Musume. Monster Musume is about a dude who finds out monsters are real and just so happens to get stuck looking after a bunch of gorgeous monster girls because the Japanese government up and accidentally delivered him a Lamia waifu like a Russian mail-order bride. Though he can infamously look at the girls, he cannot touch them for plot reasons, definitely not ecchi ones. Monster Musume in particular is seen by many as the jumping off point for many modern harem anime involving monster girls. Most modern monster romance anime are missing one key feature, in my opinion. Something that has been a key feature to the classic monster works dating all the way back to Carmilla, the mother of all modern monsters. Something that many of their anime predecessors had embedded into their DNA. I am of course talking about horror. I mean, these are monsters, after all. Most modern anime, in my opinion, as stated before, very rarely commit to the bit. Anime that deal with the romance between human and monster tend to be slice-of-life comedies, battle shonen, or something else of the like, with the horrifying origins of the MC's love interest basically just being window dressing for moe points. I mean, even if they are sexy, these monsters, vampires specifically, are famous for their body horror and robbing people of their bodily autonomy and free will. Though one contemporary work stands above this drivel, one piece of fiction so controversial that it makes others seem tame, one work that flipped the genre on its head well before other works were sparks in their mangaka's eyes. That piece of perfect fiction is 1996's Boys Love OVA Kimera by Kazuma Kodaka. And what makes this work so much more based than the others? 3 words. Mpreg, alien, vampires. Before we get started on analyzing this absolute piece of rich cinema,
this is getting to be a real pain in the ass. He's even worse than my hemorrhoid.
we should probably tackle the big ol' elephants in the room. Namely, what is an OVA and dear God, what is Mpreg? Let's start with fanfic enthusiasts' favorite, Mpreg. Mpreg, or male pregnancy, is a popular fanfiction trope that has loosely existed ever since the 1960s, thanks to the Star Trek fandom, but didn't become mainstream until the coining of the ABO genre in the early 2000s. ABO, or Alpha, Beta, and Omega, is a whole other can of worms that involves the show Supernatural and some good old-fashioned Sweet Home Alabama-ness, which is, again, hilarious because of foreshadowing that we really do not have time to get into, which is either super tragic or super fortunate depending on what kind of person you are. The takeaway from ABO and Mpreg is their functions as literary devices. Authors in fandom spaces, or just authors in general, use Mpreg as a tool to comment on societal gender norms. After all, what could be more interesting commentary on gender than basically making your own and flipping the whole natural world on its head? This, of course, was not limited to Western fandom, as many doujin circles actually included Mpreg as an oddly reoccurring theme. This reoccurrence was especially true in yaoi doujin circles, with the most famous being from Clamp. Yes, that Clamp. Cardcaptor Sakura Clamp, and their doujin, JoJo's Bizarre Marry Life. Why yes, that is the infamous dojo doujin that features Kakyoin laying an egg with Jotaro being the egg's father. So, gender commentary in Mpreg was obviously not exactly new to certain yaoi authors, which would make sense why Kazuma Kodaka included it in her body horror yaoi. Kazuma is very much a veteran BL author, as she has been writing BL ever since 1989, with her debut work Sessa Takuma. And you may have heard of her most famous work, Kazuna Bonds of Love, which is a super long-running series from the years 1992 to 2012. So she is not just a veteran, she is an icon. She even has several OVAs under her belt, such as the Kazuna OVAs, and even the endearing My Harassment. We'll call it My Harassment. Look it up if you want, I can't say it here. So her manga, Kimera, would have been another success, right? Well, why don't we get into OVAs first, then we'll talk about it. Anime OVAs, or original video animations, are short films and miniseries that were popular mainly through the 70s to 90s. These series were typically direct-to-video releases. Think Disney direct-to-video sequels from the early 2000s, essentially. Some iconic anime that are still culturally relevant to this day are actually OVAs, like Gunbuster, Project Akon, Fight, Ixer-1, Tenchi Muyo, Fake, Vampire Hunter D, and the list goes on. You may have noticed that many of these works have similar themes and genres, namely experimental sci-fi, yaoi, and yuri elements. Many OVAs have some sort of adult-oriented themes and demographics in mind. Lots of ecchi involving girls and robots. Lots of it. This is because many OVAs were kind of a stomping ground for more experimental material where mangaka and showrunners could explore new ideas that would be considered too risque for Japanese daytime TV. Hence why half the anime I listed were sci-fi and had queer themes, as stated previously, because those genres were considered lowbrow. And by lowbrow, I do mean a little nutsy. And as stated like 3 seconds before, very, very, very experimental. I mean, we had things like Regina George / Dr. Doofenshmirtz and Project Akon. We had ecchi lesbian catgirl aliens and giant biomechas talking about transhumanism way before Evangelion. And straight up, just 18 plus adaptations, and literally so much more that would not fly on 80s and 90s TV. However, there are times where the source material of these OVAs were so outside of Japanese societal norms that even they were censored, especially adaptations of raunchy or yaoi and yuri manga. These works had a lot of changes to make things more palatable, which brings us back to Kimera and how they infamously made the Mpreg yaoi straight somehow. So I guess we could finally get into the actual plot of the damn anime. Kimera starts off as any good yaoi does, with a mysterious and not at all ominous spacecraft crashing into the Earth. The spacecraft is immediately found by a hunter and his dog, who are ganked by blood-sucking flesh tentacles in a genuinely horrifying scene. Actually, if you are sensitive to gore, blood, or anything of the like, I would be wary of watching Kimera. It is pretty damn gruesome in parts, and the animators went ham on the horror segments of this whole OVA. Also, know before you ask, this OVA does not pass the Does the Dog Live test, unfortunately. So if you want to skip the first minute, I wouldn't blame you. It's really not plot relevant outside of seeing aliens exist, which I guess is plot relevant, but let's be real, it's not. This is editing spitefully pink here. I also wanted to throw in a warning here that there will be footage artifacting. The best footage of this OVA I could find, with like the cleanest lines and everything, has really, really bad artifacting, but it was this or you guys literally just saw stick figures and blobs, so I figured you guys wouldn't care about the artifacting. So back to the plot. After that scene, we finally meet our protagonist Osamu and his best friend Jay, who are cereal salesmen, or as the dub calls it,
put in too many hours selling super corny flakes to America's heartland.
Yeah, I don't know. Let me know if you have ever heard of a cereal salesman before, because I sure as hell haven't. We also get our first introduction to the sort of Chekhov's gun of the OVA, Osamu's mysterious bell. Furthermore, we learn that Osamu is a giant worrywart sassy and is very, very, very lonely. So lonely, in fact, that Jay just makes fun of him for it. Well, Jay, watch out, because your buddy ain't gonna be single for long. But the two's bantering is stopped by a mysterious fire that they see up ahead, and when they get to the fire, they find the army, and they also instantly are warned to leave, but Jay, as charming as ever, instantly tries to pick a fight with the armed man, but is then interrupted by a psychic alien vampire fighting extravaganza. In the fight, Jay and Osamu are separated, and we get this scene the OVA is pretty much best known for. This beautiful creature is the titular Kimera. The two's makeout sesh is interrupted, however, by, "God damn. Sorry, let me compose myself. They are nearly blasted by this fine specimen of a vampire named Keanu, not to be confused with Reeves, but they are saved by another less hot, admittedly, vampire named Ginzu. The next day, Osamu and Jay are brought to a secret government laboratory that happens to be run by Jay's father. What a coincidence! Jay's father, Dr. Gibson, pulls the ultimate rookie mistake and leaves his whole ID for his son to nab after the two fight about if vampires exist or not. Jay then decides in his infinite wisdom to sneak around the facility to quench his thirst for knowledge, and so Osamu can find that hot vampire femboy and get laid or whatever. Oh, and as just a little check-in, we are only 8 minutes into this 47-minute runtime. The plot goes very fast, but it won't for long. We get a lovely shot of this conspicuously placed poster that I am sure has no foreshadowing whatsoever for this horror movie. We also get this lovely moment in the dub where Osamu's femboy sense tingle.
It's a dumb idea. Let's stop fooling around and go back.
It's right there, at the end of the hall.
What is?
That sign is just camouflage. Something's drawing me in this direction.
Are you sure it's not just a suicidal impulse?
Just get your key.
And yay, they find Kimera! And like the horny idiot in a horror movie he is, Osamu frees him, or as the dub in English call him, her.
Must be going crazy too. You were right, Osamu. It is a woman in ice. No, what am I saying? It isn't even human! That's it! We're out of here! We're leaving!
Yes, you heard me correctly. They made the non-binary space vampire and a yaoi a woman. This OVA rather infamously changed the gender of Kimera, this hauntingly beautiful gender androgynous supernatural force that's typically addressed with he, him pronouns, to being addressed with she, her for some reason. So they essentially erased the queer identity of this work and replaced this queer quote-unquote love story with a straight one. This change was allegedly done to make this super niche work more palatable to a mainstream audience, which is super ironic considering Kodaka probably wrote this subversive BL vampire story to do the opposite of that. There's also the possibility that Kimera's pronouns could have just changed by accident during the dubbing or subbing process. This is mainly an idea I've seen floating around, namely the wiki. So I would take that one especially with a grain of salt. Which, I mean, that could have happened, but just, look at him. I kind of doubt that's the sole reason. It's more than likely a combination of all of the above. Plus good old-fashioned homophobia from people who didn't get the appeal of a BL in the 90s. Though, again, that's all just speculation and conjecture. Back to the plot or whatever. While Osamu was contemplating violating the cardinal rule of all monster films, which is don't stick your ding-a-ling in it, we learned that another scientist has beef with Jay's dad over his name not being higher up in a research paper, which is honestly the most realistic thing about this entire OVA. For those who get it, they get it. For those who don't, they don't. Oh yeah, and we learned that he's been collaborating with the vampire Ginzu and has been procuring the vampire bodies to feed on. But that's not important. What is important is this iconic line that I have been using from the English dub.
This is getting to be a real pain in the ass. He's even worse than my hemorrhoids.
Iconic, truly iconic. I have 0 notes. This dub is amazing. He will henceforth be called Dr. Hemorrhoids. Dr. Hemorrhoids. Okay, I'll stop. Except I won't. Has been helping Ginzu empower the mother. Something Ginzu promises will bring the totally not gullible at all Dr. Fame, fortune, and even his name at the top of that coveted scientific journal. Ooh. Obviously worth dooming humanity for. I mean, who wouldn't trust this face? Dr. Hemorrhoids is also instantly found out by Dr. Gibson.
No, it can't be.
Oh, crap. Huh? Oh, I'm sorry, sir. I forgot my level access card.
Finally, back to Osamu. He does in fact decide that being horny is more important than survival, and he commits to unleashing Kimera, who instantly makes out with him and is just as down bad for him as he is for him, if not more so. Actually, Kimera just in general is way more down bad than Osamu is, but we'll get to that later. Also, love. The only thing Osamu can say to letting the alien vampire out of their cell and tripping a government agency's security system is just, sorry, woo, like the boy failure he is.
I'm sorry, but I've got no choice. I didn't mean to get you in trouble.
Oh, and he almost freaking dies, which, you know what? He deserves it for those crimes. But rejoice, dear viewer, for Keanu Birdman Reeves over here finally delivers us the fabled plot progression that went missing literally 8 decades ago. We learned that, surprise, surprise, Kimera is the mother entity that Dr. Hemorrhoids is working on for Ginzu. Keanu believes that if Kimera is allowed freedom, he will literally consume the earth and make all life go extinct. But before Keanu is able to give a proper explanation to what the hell he's talking about, the quartet is attacked by a giant snake monster. Yeah, that's never properly explained. It's implied to be a lower tier vampire, but just how the hell it became like that, we'll never know. The monster attack triggers the mute Kimera to activate his teleportation magic. What? Don't ask me. I have no clue what's happening anymore either. And finally, to end this midpoint scene, Ginzu then chops off Keanu's arm before he can stop Kimera along with Osamu from teleporting away, leaving Jay and his dad just as confused and baffled as I am. I hope you liked that plot development because we aren't getting any more for a solid 5 minutes. This is because we just arrived at what this OVA is probably most infamous for outside of the gender swap. Warning, a legitimate one. If you are sensitive to themes of SA, you should be wary of the next section. I won't talk about it in gory detail or anything, but I want to throw out a disclaimer just in case. This section should only take a minute, so if you want to skip ahead, please do. Kimera finds himself teleported to a random alleyway where he wanders in front of the seediest arcade I have ever seen in my life. He is then noticed by 2 absolute gems of men who are confused by Kimera's gender and start to harass him in the street. Fun fact, this is the closest the dub gets to acknowledging that Kimera is in fact supposed to be an androgynous male and not a cis woman. And one thing leads to another, and they lure Kimera back into an apartment where they start to assault them. What can I say but yikes? The sequence is so long, too. It's a whole 5 minutes. There's a break in between that is plot relevant, but we'll get to that in a different section for the sake of flow. But hey, silver lining. It turns out that Kimera is actually the one doing the assaulting here, and they brutally consume both men. You know, I do support women's wrongs, and I would also like to throw out there that I also support NB's atrocities as well, especially justifiable ones. Now that that horrible scene is over, we are greeted with Jay again. Thank you, Jay. Thank you. Thank God, anything is better than what we just went through. Dr. Gibson reveals that Kimera, Keanu, and Ginzu all recently arrived on Earth on mysterious spaceships, like the one from the opening, but they were only able to detain Kimera, mainly because they are in a coma-like state whenever Osamu isn't around. They then oddly rush into Jay's house for some reason to deliver the rest of the exposition. I guess the animators wanted a scenery change or something.
Upstairs.
Where's my kiss?
Ooh.
Goodness.
And to look at top secret government information on Jay's home computer. Girls, what are we doing here? Why would you do that on your own son's computer? Your ass is fired, Dr. Gibson. Dr. Hemorrhoid's name is going straight to the top of that paper about the mother. Also, say goodbye to Jay and his dad, because this is the last time we see them until the ending sequence. But I digress. Again, we learn Kimera is mother, because he is the only one of his species that is able to get pregnant. So if Kimera wants to save their species, they must find a mate. So literally, Mpreg is the key to saving the super space alien vampires. And you thought I wouldn't bring that up again. You thought it was just a random tangent to open this video up. It's plot relevant, baby. We'll talk more about the vampire lore in like a minute or two, because Osamu has found himself inside a flashback, but not his own. One that belongs to Kimera themselves. Kimera, as it turns out, is vampire royalty, and even has a cavalcade of magical animals by their side, including dragons! Homegirl has dragons! Love that for them, honestly. We finally put together that Kimera responds to Osamu because of the bell charm, you know, the one I mentioned all the way back in the beginning of the video. Or at least this section. As it turns out, Keanu has one too. We also learned that, kind of like Edward from Twilight, just to hammer that parallel back in here, Kimera used to be a vegetarian vampire. But unlike the Cullens, he couldn't even bring himself to harm any living creatures, essentially starving himself.
No, I cannot.
Don't be foolish. We have no choice.
Life is too precious. If survival means killing my friends to drink their blood, then I would rather die.
Oh, you fool!
I know we're in the middle of a really shoddy horror OVA, but that's cute. That's so cute. Kimera, you rascal, you. Keanu mentions that Kimera's life is not their own, and that not drinking blood will cause problems for basically the vampire government in the long run. So instead of consuming blood like a normal vampire, Kimera is forced to drink Keanu's blood, because essentially Kimera is starving themselves. Kimera, as it turns out, also wonders where his mother has gone, and I guess that was supposed to be a major motivation for them. Too bad that's never elaborated on past this scene. Like at all. You know, despite motherhood being a major theme of this OVA, no one's mother is involved. No mother, outside of Kimera. But that's just because he is mother, not a mother. You know what I mean? The gays know what I mean. The gays know what I mean. Kimera wonders this until Ginzu shows Kimera the truth. Mother vampires are basically just giant blood banks used to grow more vampires. We learned that vampires are on the brink of extinction because they are functionally sexless and can't reproduce. So Kimera, horrified that he is basically destined to become like his mother and harm creatures to propagate the vampire race, makes Keanu promise to eliminate him if he ever is suspected of harming another living creature, which explains Keanu's motivations. Yay! Motivation explained. However, one big thing we still don't know is why Kimera is like this now. No, seriously, why are they suddenly a mute makeout machine and all of the flashbacks are seen as this kind, demure, Disney princess-like figure? Like, they now have no personality. Genuinely, it is never addressed, which is so weird even by this anime standards. We then cut to a horrified Osamu who just got info dumped all of this via dream sequence, and he also had Ginzu in the memory flashback with him basically monologuing about how the world's going to end, so you know, he's kind of going through it right now. And he's also just now learning that his vampire waifu may not like him for normal reasons. Speaking of, guess who's back and covered in the blood of their victims? It's Kimera! Yay! Kimera just so happens to run into Osamu waking up in a church that just so happens to be a secret base for Dr. Hemorrhoids. Because plot. Osamu points out that the only reason Kimera loves him is because they think he's Keanu, their actual lover / would-be assassin. Ginzu then appears yet again to kidnap Kimera, F up Osamu, and then to expound upon the exposition dump even more. Yeah, half this OVA is just exposition dumping, you know, in case you couldn't tell. It turns out that vampires have basically been roaming the earth for basically ever and forged a treaty with humanity's ancestors, which of course humanity then betrayed. Humanity, according to Ginzu, then proceeds to wipe out all other vampires, implying that we are the reasons for their species' rapid extinction.
But it was just another in an endless series of treacherous acts. You took our ambassador who came to you in search of peace, and you tore him asunder. Then your scientists removed his brain, which they keep alive in a jar. Now the time for your judgment is at hand.
After that heavy lore drop, we learn that the reason Kimera is the only vampire that can get pregnant is because he is only half vampire. Their mother is actually a human woman that was kidnapped and turned into that vampire broodmother a la Dragon Age Origins, which is genuinely one of the scariest things about this OVA, I'm not going to lie to you. Genuinely horrifying concept. This also means that Kimera, Keanu, and Ginzu are all brothers, as they all share the same exact mother and are clones of her. Kimera is just the only successful one that can reproduce. Also, Ginzu is implied to be in love with Keanu, or at least have a thing for him, meaning all three vampire main characters are brothers, clones, and are in some capacity lovers.
What are you doing?
Sweet home Alabama. Keanu and Ginzu then proceed to have a lover's quarrel / brotherly bout that is genuinely really cool. I actually really love the fighting choreography of this OVA. It's neat. You guys should check out the fight scenes. Too bad Keanu gets destroyed because Osamu being a dumbass, though. So now Keanu must entrust the dumbest of all horror protagonists I have ever seen to slay Kimera, our titular monster. Poor Keanu's final wish was doomed from the start. At least he gets to stab his brother through the heart with a cross, though. That's pretty cool. Very, very subtle symbolism you got there, Kimera. Very subtle. Osamu, meanwhile, is debating between slaying the monster that will literally kill the entire planet or keeping his waifu alive. It's like the ancient proverbs say, waifu or laifu. God, I am cringe-u. Ugh. But like any good horror movie, we get a fade to black instead of knowing the ultimate fate of our monster. Just kidding. It is assumed by Jay, who finally got back to the plot, that Osamu perished, but we know better than that. Our last scene of the OVA is sickly-looking Osamu somewhere in Nowheresville, USA, getting groceries for Kimera, with the implication being Kimera is not only feeding on Osamu, but he is also pregnant with their child, meaning the whole entire world might just be doomed by the end of this OVA. Kimera was, despite its flaws, certainly a unique piece of horror that I can't stop thinking about. Between the incestuous clone brothers, misgendering, Mpreg, and hemorrhoids, there was a lot of jank. There is also the big issue of pacing, which is horrible. Just flat out. This is mainly because the 2-volume manga had obviously more time to develop a plot, characters, and have actual themes when compared to a 47-minute OVA that censors out the yaoi from yaoi. Like, I understand that part of this slow writing is for suspense reasons, like the laboratory sequence, but it's not a real excuse. Any good horror leaves stuff to the imagination, but that does not really excuse shitty writing and the OVA's failure to explain, well, almost anything. Kimera's characterization is the one that took the biggest hit here. Nothing about modern-day him is ever explained, and no, his sad backstory does not count. It does not explain why he's suddenly a walking comatose victim that is suddenly down to clown. And by clown, I do mean murder. But to give Kimera, the work, not the person, credit, there was plenty that I earnestly liked about it. As stated like a billion years ago, Mpreg as a literary device can be useful when you want to comment on societal gender norms. I think the reoccurring themes of body horror in connection to motherhood and how brutal it can be lends itself well to the Mpreg plot device. Even if motherhood and horror are pretty commonly associated with each other and the execution was not the best, I still liked it. There is also the commentary on Kimera as this sort of existence between man and woman that feels very non-binary coded in a cool way, which I feel like may have been the author's original intent. Kimera is obviously supposed to be a creature that surpasses gender. They are perceived as both male, female, and neither, depending on how you consume the work. They have both male and female functionality, and their role in the story is both as damsel and main antagonistic force. Kimera, seemingly by accident, is a really complicated character, and if the source material had more time to bake in the oven, he would have had a better chance to shine as a villain, not just as a plot device for Ginzu and Osamu to fight over. But hey, despite its flaws, it's still a better love story than Twilight.
This is getting to be a real pain in the ass. He's even worse than my hemorrhoids.